What's that?
So has Izzy been around? Izzy?
Oh, which Shlomo is this?
Here, you haven't really seen me on videos before. I usually join Rabbi Eisenberger's shores, but I've been working a lot lately. So I've been able to make them at 11 o'clock lately.
Ah, okay.
Now I'm waking up earlier so I can come see your shores. And I also like to join Rabbi Englander's shores, which start in about 20 minutes from now.
Yeah, Izzy usually comes on, but unless he's live. He's not here yet, so he may come on in just a moment.
All right, thanks, Rabbi.
Okay, welcome. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. What's that?
Oh, no.
It looks like it's not connected. You're right. Yeah, how'd you do?
You represented us. I know, that's why I felt good.
Nice.
I came 73rd or something.
All right, in the middle. Okay.
Not quite, but good enough. But I think I got 10 out of the 14 questions right. It's just how fast you go. Right? And there's a lot of younger people who I'll blame my system. They say for over these tools.
Just 1 second. I'm just going to check the connection. It's working. Try one more thing. There we are. Okay, we're going to start a new sieve today. So we were learning about Shadchanus yesterday, and there's a lot of details, but we found an interesting sefer, so maybe I'll make use of it in the future. Okay, Seif Yud Ches, Gedolei HaChachamim. Now, this following halacha is based upon the principle that we learned that in order for an employer to be in violation of Bal Tolin, of not delaying wages, he has to be the one who's doing the hiring, and he's also in charge of the money. He's got to be in control of the finances of the company. So, Gedolei HaChachamim Hayanoagim Lischor Po'alim Al Yedei Shaliach. Is he someone on the connection today? Shlomo is a friend of yours. He asked for you.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, hey, Izzy.
Hey, Shlomo. Boker Tov.
Okay.
You want to see me?
Yeah, he saw you already. He doesn't need to see you again.
Once is more than
All right. Gedolei hachachamim hayunogim lischor po'olam al yedei shaliach. So the great wise men of earlier generations used to have a custom to hire workers via proxy. In other words, a person who was very meticulous in observance of halacha would want to ensure that he could not bring himself to the violation of Bal Tolin. So how would he do it? He would make sure that he would ask someone else in his company to hire the workers. Sheyomar scharchem al balabayas, who would say to the worker, the boss will pay you. So I, the boss, am not hiring them directly. Kidei shelo yavo'u la'av or below sa'aseh, im yihiyu trudim v'lo yiyalem panai leforim bizmana. It just in the event that a day may go by that I, the boss, didn't have time to pay them at the end of the day or at the end of the week when their wages were due. In other words, just out of an sort of like an insurance policy, we know that obviously you're still in violation of the pasuk in Mishlei. if you don't pay your workers on time. But in order to avoid the biblical violation, they would do it this way as a safeguard to protect them, that in the event, chas v'shalom, I don't end up paying you on time, I'll at least not be in violation of the deoraisa. V'im'i efshar al yedei shaliach, and if it's not possible to hire via proxy, tov lahasnos im hasachir b'shah shesochro, that it's a good idea to enter into a contract with the employee directly and basically make the following stipulation. Al menas shelo yischayev leparo bizmano, ki shema yihiyeh tarud. I'm hiring you on the following conditions. That yes, our intention is to pay you on time, but in the event that I can't pay you on time, you still accept to work for me, right? O shema lo yiyeh lo mos berevach sheyochel leparo. Or maybe at the time when payment is due, I may not have sufficient funds to take care of you completely because I'm going to need the money for some other area of the business. Ella yihielo v'yitzarech lahotziam. Because I may have the funds, but I may need to use them for something else, for some other purpose. V'nimsa over below sa'aseh. And it'll turn out that I'm in violation of a negative commandment in the Torah. So you might look at this halach and say, this doesn't sound very ethical, right? In other words, your guarantee should be to the worker, I promise to pay you on time. Here you have a fellow who's trying to be pious by looking for a loophole to get out of violating the Torah. And so I think that really what he's trying to point out is that there may be situations where what if an emergency happens and I just can't be there at the end of the day when payment is due. So I want to be able to avoid to be in violation. So I make a stipulation. I promise to pay you every day on time, but do you hereby accept employment in the event that in a rare situation, I don't pay you on one particular day or one particular week? Do you still accept to be employed, and are you moichel on that one rare situation? In other words, it's not that he's trying to regularly get out of this obligation of the Torah, but he wants to make sure that he's not going to have this albatross, so to speak, around his neck, that he's got to constantly worry that even when there's an emergency and his wife is in labor and she's got to go to the hospital, that I'm going to be in violation of the Torah because I wasn't around to give you the funds. Okay. He says, and remember, we learned that even when you don't have funds, we learned that it's an act of piety to borrow money in order to make sure that your workers get paid on time. Even though you may not be halachically obligated to, but it is considered to be the moral thing to do, to even borrow money to make sure your workers get paid. So, however, if you make this stipulation in advance, he says, but when you make the stipulation in advance, when you hire the person, then any financial arrangement, almost any financial arrangement is legally binding, and therefore you mitigate that contingency. He says, but obviously in all situations where you can pay the person on time, you should not rely on this condition. Ki anihu ve'elav hu noseas nafsho, because as the pasuk says, this man is in need of cash, and he's placing his life and the life of his family in your hands. So this is not something this is not a loophole that you should lechatchila rely upon, but it's an insurance policy. When you enter into negotiations with an employee, you say to the employee, I just want you to know that there may be situations where I'm not able to pay on time. Are you okay with that? And will you still accept employment? I'll pay you in full, but there may be a rare situation where I can't pay you on time. Let's say, a fellow says to his worker, I have a family member in the hospital. There are going to be days when I'm not going to be here at the end of the week to pay you. Is that okay with you that you'll get it the following? You'll get it on a Monday instead of a Friday. In other words, it has to, if this is something that you feel could happen, then it is important for you to make this condition with whoever you hire in order to mitigate the biblical violation. Right. So we know the pasuk in Mishlei. That's what we've been learning previously. There's still a pasuk in Mishlei, which holds you to the obligation to pay him on time, even when you don't have the money, right? But when you make this stipulation, then you won't even be a violation of the pasuk in Mishlei, unless you maliciously, unless you deliberately just hold it over him. In other words, there's nothing that's holding you back. You just decided I don't feel like it, or you don't feel like getting out of bed, or you just want to exploit your workers. So that's of course not something that we're talking about over here. We're talking about a person who's very meticulous in halachic observance and wants to make sure that he won't be in violation. Yeah, obviously you could exploit this loophole and end up really treating your employees shabbily. Yeah, that's right. So it is a loophole, but it's a loophole that you should use very sparingly.
Sometimes people hire paid laborers and paid office workers, whatever it might be, through a temp agency. Now they want to make sure that that person's being paid, and I know their contract really is with the agency,
right?
So they want to, but that person being hired through the agency is working for them. So what if the agency and there's stories more. This happens more with maybe caregivers or nannies. Good stories about that where they're not getting paid for these agencies, and but they're doing the work for the people. So what happens there?
Right. So remember, this whole halacha is predicated on that if the employer is not doing the hiring, but he has a proxy to do the hiring, like an agency, so then he cannot ever be in violation of the biblical commandment. He could still be in violation of the pasuk in Mishlei if he knows that this person is not getting paid and it's within his power to make good on it. So, there may be, now, how does it work when you hire a worker through a temp agency? Isn't the employer still issuing the paycheck directly to the employee? Isn't that how it works, or how does it work? Or does he issue the paycheck to the temp agency? Okay, and then the agency might. So if the agency holds on to the paycheck, then it's so really then who is the employer in that situation? It's the temp agency is the employer, right? So it's the temp agency's responsibility. It's not the boss of the company's responsibility, because the guy's not even working for me in that case, right? He's working for the temp agency, and they send him out to do the work at my place. Of course, I'm getting the benefit, but at the end of the day, it's not dependent upon who's getting the benefit. It's dependent upon who's responsible for paying them. The temp agency contracts with the worker. They pay the worker. So they're the ones who could potentially be in violation of Baal Tolin. But as long as the employer fulfills his contractual obligations with the temp agency, he's not going to be in violation of Baal Tolin. Okay. Now, va'afilu im ha'ani mevake sheyis charo shomer etzel balabayas, tov leparo tchila bizmano im yachol, v'yachzor v'yikach mimenu b'toras pikada. Now he says, and this halacha, as far as making sure that a guy gets paid on time, goes so far as, what if the employee says, can you do me a favor and hold my wages for me over the weekend? I'm worried I'm going to spend it. And, payday can sometimes be a very problematic time for certain people, because they get their paycheck. They immediately cash the paycheck and then they go to the bar. That was a That was like a typical situation where on payday you went to the bar, and that could be a real serious problem. So let's say the wife of your employee comes with her husband on Friday and says, Mr. Berkowitz, I don't want you to pay my husband until Monday. I want you to hold on to the paycheck until Monday. So, and Mr. Berkowitz says to the worker, is that what you want? He says, yep, that's what my wife says I want. So, what would be in that situation? So he says that technically you would be justified to hold on to the paycheck. But what would be preferable from a halachic standpoint is give the fellow his paycheck or his wages, whatever you're paying, however you're paying him, and then ask for it back. Because in that way, you've fulfilled the letter of the law of paying him on time. And then you can take back the money and say, okay, I'm holding this for you for safekeeping. Right, exactly. The im ein ha'ani mevakesh lahavkido yuchol lachzor v'likach mimenu b'toras halva im hu tzarech lamos rak sheyifra'enu tchila. He says, and let's say the situation is different. Let's say the boss needs the money. What he should do, really, what would be preferable for him to do is say, here's your payment. Can I borrow from you? Can I borrow this money from you? Because I really do need it to take care of, I gotta take care of whatever. I gotta pay the other guy who just came here. I gotta pay the delivery person. Otherwise they're gonna refuse to deliver the goods or whatever the situation is. That would actually be preferable than telling the worker, I can't pay you. Pay him and then borrow the money back from him.
The wife says, hold on to my husband's money. Are you allowed to spend it as the employer, or you just keep it?
Well, it depends on the stipulation. Then you're getting into the issue of, am I a shomer or am I a lova? Am I a borrower? So it all depends on how the stipulation is made. And it'll certainly also depend, like what happens if the place gets robbed and then the money gets stolen. So if I'm a borrower from my employee, so then I still owe him the money. But if I'm a shomer on a stack of cash that was in an envelope that had his name on it, and the place gets broken into, and the money gets stolen, so then as a shomer chinam, I would not be in violation, and I would not owe him the money. I could say, I'm really sorry, but they cleaned everything out, including your pay. Okay, so anyway, let's take a look at the Imrei Yaakov. Tov lahasnos v'chulei shelo yischayev. It's good as a way of making sure that you never violate the deoraisa, to make this conditional statement with the worker. Dafka b'lashon zeh. Aval ein lahasnos al manas shelo yihiyeh b'val tolim. So the way that you should verbalize the stipulation is that I'm hiring you on the condition that you acknowledge that you may not get paid always on time. And that's the way you have to stipulate it. You can't say, I'm hiring you on the condition that I'm not in violation of Baal Tolim. He says that's not a valid stipulation. Because according to many poskim, that wouldn't work. There's a principle of masna al mashakasa b'Torah. You can't make a stipulation where you say, I'm going to eat this pork on the condition that I'm not in violation of eating pork. That's ridiculous, right? So you similarly, you can't say, I'm hiring you on the condition that I'm not in violation of Baal Tolim. That's between me and God. That's got nothing to do with you and me. So if you forgive getting paid on time, so then I won't be in violation of Baal Tolim. But you can't tell me it's okay. You're not in violation of Baltalin. You can say it's okay. I don't need the money at the end of the day or at the end of the week. That's what the worker can say. Okay. Next, then he says, Midas Chasidus Lilvos. We know that it's an act of piety to borrow money in order to pay your workers on time. Again, technically, you're not required to, but if you know that your worker is relying on you, Friday comes around and he needs that paycheck to cover his Shabbos expenses, so then it would be the pious thing to do, since you know that he's relying on you, to do whatever you need to do in order to get this fellow his money.
You're more likely to have the wherewithal to borrow than he is.
Of course, I have a line of credit. He may not have a line of credit. And it's also brought down in the Sfarim, where is this brought down from the Stei Chemed, which is an encyclopedic work. He said that the Ari actually felt it was obligatory to borrow money in order to pay your workers. Upam echas batal tfilas mincha al yedei zeh, or bitel tfilas mincha al yedei zeh. That so much so that the Ari himself once couldn't daven mincha as a result, because he was so involved in this. Umidivrei harav kan shehevi tehu midas chasidus mashma demitzad hadin emo chiyav lilvos. He says the language that we're reading here in the Rav Shulchan Aruch implies that it's not obligatory, but rather it's an act of piety. Aval ein le'el siftes vav Imrei Yaakov is malafilu the avas chesed sfirlei the tzarech lilvos v'lo rak midas chasidus. The avas chesed, which is written by the Chafetz Chaim, also felt that it was obligatory. So it may not even just be a midas chasidus. It may be an actual halachic obligation, according to some poskim. That so strong is this obligation that you may even have to borrow money in order to make sure the guy gets paid on time. Okay, let me just see if there's any likutim. There's some likutim here. Kol tenai shebemamon kayim, that we learned that virtually every financial stipulation will work halachically. So, you could negotiate with the worker that you don't have to pay him at the end of the work period. Isa b'shulchan aruch orachayim, kol davar shemivin lifnei ha'adam sheyesh lo reach v'ha'adam toiv lo, tzarech litein mimenu l'shamesh. So this is really a halacha, very interesting. It's a halacha in food service. Let's take a quick look at this halacha. Kuf samech tes, seif aleph. We'll just bring it up on the Sefaria. Just give me 1 second. Kuf samech tes is 169. So, Shulchan Aruch, Orachayim. So this is din shamash l'seuda. The halacha here. Let me share my screen so everyone can see it. The halacha is as follows: Kol davar shemevin lifnei ha'adam sheyesh lo reach. Anything that if you would put it in front of a person's face, it would have a very strong fragrance, like an aromatic food, like a bowl of cholent, or something else that has a pungent fragrance. Yeah, that's right. The ha'adam ta'evlo, and it would normally cause a person to crave that item once he smells it. Sorech litein mimenu l'shamish miyad. That you have to, if you have someone who's your domestic help and they're helping with the food service, you're obligated to offer them some of that food even before they serve it. Whereas if you have a housekeeper or a butler, if you're very wealthy, and they're in charge of the food service to your guests, you must offer that some of the food to your worker before they do the food service, because otherwise you're causing them anguish. Because here they are, they have to serve the food. And the truth is, a lot of times you'll offer it to them and they'll say, no, it's okay. I ate before I got here. But you're still obligated to offer it to them. Right. Yeah. Okay. Umidas chasidus uliten lo miyad mikol min vamin. And it's considered to be an act of piety to give them every single food item. In other words, not just one, not just the beans. You have to give them the meat and the beans and everything like that. Below yitin, the kishka too. Below yitin lo kol zman shahakos biyado o biyad balabayas. But let me just bring up the Mishnah Berurah. Right? He says, and so the Mishnah Berurah explains. He says, "The davar sheyesh lo reach mazik la'adam k'sha'ochlin b'fanav v'hu toiv lo." That anything that has an aromatic odor, a fragrance, actually can help will actually injure a person physically if he sees people eating it in his presence and he can't have it. Ve'ein nosen lo miyad avol davar if you don't give it to him immediately. Avol davar she'ein lo reach yachol lechol tchila v'achar kach yitein l'shamash. But if something does not have that aromatic fragrance, then you're not obligated to give it to him right away. You could always feed him afterwards. And then the Mishnah Berurah writes, "Uvedavar muad sagi." You don't have to give him a whole meal. Even a small amount is sufficient. Because even with a small amount, he'll be satisfied. In other words, he won't be overtaken by this great hunger. Because to ha'achronim, and the achronim write, "Afilu im hisna im misharsu b'shas schiruso lifter atzmu mizelo mahani hatanai." The poskim write, and this is what we're going to be getting to. Can I make a stipulation in advance with my worker, with the server, that I'm hiring you on the condition that I don't have to give you something to eat? So no, he says, no, that deny does not help, because you're actually physically harming them. The daf, well, you don't want him serving your food if the guy is getting over. Okay. The dafka b'shamesh sha'omed u'mishamesh ve'eno ochel imoim biyachad. But this only applies to a server who's doing the food service and is not going to be eating with the rest of the company. But if he's also going to be eating with everyone, in other words, you have Shabbos guests or your kids, and they're helping you serve the meal, you don't have to make sure that they can wait. Why? Because there's a principle called pas bisalo. There's a principle called that when you know you have bread in your basket, you're not chalashing when it's right in front of you. Because in 5 minutes I'll get to sit down and eat also. Okay? Now, Isa Bigamara, the Misha Heriach Reach Machol V'hu Misabelo, Im Enu Yachol Lahasigo, Kol Rok Sheyobo L'Soch Piv Mach Mastai B'Sa'ochel Lo Yivla. In the same vein, the Mishnah Berurah writes, based on the Gemara, that if you smell something very aromatic, and it's really you're chalashing to eat it, and you build up saliva in your mouth as a result, you know what I'm talking about? Like sometimes even just thinking about something, you build up saliva. He says you shouldn't deliberately swallow that saliva. Why? He says don't swallow it, because that could present danger. Who knows what this is based on? It's not based on conventional medical wisdom, but it's better to spit out the saliva in that situation. Yeah, don't do it in shul. Don't do. We just learned, right? We just learned last week that, or was it 2 weeks ago, that there used to be a custom to spit at a certain point in davening, the Aleinu. But we don't do that anymore because we don't have spittoons in our shul. Thank God.
I think I read in Shasta, like one rabbi used to, one of the halachas says if you have to spit, use your head covering. But then rabbi's like, I don't want to do that. And then, but he's like, he spit behind him. You ever hear about that? Instead of using spit,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
spit behind him, like
Yeah.
right in shul, just spit on the floor or something. It's ridiculous.
Right. So we learned recently in a shir in our Smichas Chaver program that was in a bygone era. Today, it's not considered socially acceptable to do that. Back in the day, that's what people used to do. It was a different kind of, people had dirt floors and people had different social conventions. Spitting was considered to be an acceptable social convention. As long as you didn't spit right on the guy or right in front of him, you could spit behind him and everything was okay. Okay, it was a different world. People didn't wear deodorant. I mean, there's a whole, we are pampered today, so talk about smells, aromatic smells, right? Very different world. Okay, so we're going to come back to this halacha Mirz Hashem tomorrow. What the Imrei Yaakov is bringing from this halacha is that there are certain times that a Tanai does not help. Okay, so let's hold it here for today.